Nord, how you coming on the dunk?
Oh my god.
Well, hey kids, welcome back to another community curation video. Today we're looking at the Jian 7 Pulse Rifle, which is a decently built rifle that balances itself between a strong PvE and PvP level of usage. However, instead of focusing on 3 individual roles like we normally do, we're going to focus on a single role specifically this time, and I'm going to rattle your brain with a bunch of words that won't mean a goddamn thing if you're a new light player, and by the end of it, I'll have learned you a thing or two. We're going over a Zen Moment and Rangefinder combo. Nothing super crazy, but it packs a bit more of a punch than you might initially think. My first impression of it was not the greatest, but you really just need to understand what an adaptive pulse rifle is and is not capable of, and where the weaknesses are. For starters, you need to remember that adaptive pulse rifles have the worst TTK, but a normal Guardian kill will only take 5 crits and 2 body shots. This is extremely forgiving in the grand scheme of things, and it means that this gun can be used for something and is potentially worth more than just the gun parts you'll get from dismantling it. Second, being the first weakness on this gun, target acquisition on Jian 7 specifically will always sit at a natural 64, meaning that you're going to have to try a bit harder to hit those shots than you normally would with something else. Just for the sake of letting everybody know what role I'm currently using in this video, these are my perks. In Tier 1, we have an SPO57 front, which grants a plus 14 to range and subtracts 4 from handling in return for an additional plus 4 in zoom. Next, we're looking at high caliber rounds, which grants an additional plus 5 to range. Onto attack rolls, we're looking at Zen Moment, which encourages sustained fire in exchange for stability and handling. That is a winner of a perk, let me tell you. The last one on the list here is Rangefinder, which increases the gun's effective range and zoom. That is another winner of a perk, let me tell you. To be honest, I was having a really bad time with this gun at first specifically, but it's more or less because it took some time to get used to. It honestly just depends on whether or not you as a player know how to handle it, and while adaptive pulse rifles don't have the most optimal TTK, being only 5 crits and 2 bodies, it's really user-friendly. One could argue that a lower stability stat is less than preferred, and while that isn't inaccurate, pardon the pun, Zen Moment makes up for that in the long run with sustained fire, like I said earlier. But I digress. Allow me to elaborate a little bit here. Jian 7 stands out not because it's the best, because there are many guns that outshine it, but rather because it is one of the easiest pulse rifles to use, and it allows for some pretty decent stats if you know what to look for. Stats that can give you an edge in PvP, and turn this gun from a paperweight into the final nail in another player's casket. It's not the greatest, but it's also not the worst. Keep that in mind. For starters, base magazine size is extremely forgiving for its overall TTK. 33 rounds is the lowest that it can go, with 42 being the magazine cap without a backup mag at the cost of a cut in reload speed. Like I said earlier, it only takes 5 crits and 2 bodies to take another player down that isn't actively ruining everyone's day with the supercharge. Boasting only a 29 in impact makes for a gun that can deal damage, but doesn't necessarily mean that you always will because of its lower aim assist and its naturally terrible stability. A gun's perks can only take you so far. There has to be an element of player skill in the equation somewhere, somehow. Let's just say for a moment that you hit every single shot that you take, each kill being 5 crits and 2 bodies. Taking into consideration the gun's lowest magazine size, the math claims that said mag is capable of taking 4.5 players down before you have to stuff another mag up in there. Meaning 4 kills and a single half-dead player running around bleeding out. This is extremely forgiving when you take into account the perks that it can drop with, many of them being exceedingly handy. They allow for you to really capitalize on specific stats and make the gun worth your while. We're going to talk about a few of those right now. If you want to capitalize on range, you can go with an SPO57 front in Tier 1, and from Tier 2 you could take ricochet rounds, armor-piercing rounds, high-caliber rounds, or a light mag. Those will push your natural range stat up to a 65, excluding any active buffs, like Rangefinder, for example. The lowest range stat that it can naturally roll with is a 47, and it comes from an SLO-12 post and any mag attachments that do not boost your range. If it didn't drop with any of the things I listed, and it didn't come with Rangefinder, throw it in the trash, because it's not worth your time. That will not benefit you in any PvP environment whatsoever. It's just going to make you have a really bad time. Now, stability is a little wonky on this gun in specific. It fluctuates a lot more than what you might think at first glance. Stability is one of those stats that can be worked around to a degree, especially if you're playing with a mouse and a keyboard, but with a recoil direction of 80, it can definitely drag you down if you don't know how to compensate for it. If you really want to maximize stability and turn this gun into a damn laser, or at least a laser in comparison to its natural stability stat, you're going to want to search high and low for a drop with either flared magwell or ricochet rounds. Its lowest stability stat sits at an abysmal 51, which is rather, well, terrible in the long run, so Flared magwell will push the stability to a 55, and ricochet rounds will push it up to a 60, which is a really big boost. And lastly, you'll want either Firmly Planted or Zen Moment. Both increase your stability even further, but in different ways. These perks will turn your gun into a decent asset to a mid-range PvP loadout. Mid-range in the sense of you're not quite sniping, but you're not quite 15 feet away either. For handling, you'll need a short zoom sight. An SLO-12 post will boost it up to a 66, and an SRO-52 ocular will drop it all the way down to a less than preferred 46. Which is trash. Secondary attachments will neither raise or lower that stat, so just be on the lookout for that scope in specific, and if it didn't come with Firmly Planted, then just throw the whole ass gun away, because you're not going to be able to maximize your handling as far as it's actually capable. And if you're really going to try and spec into handling, you may as well just go hard or go home. Firmly Planted is a really good perk for handling, stability, and target acquisition. Do not forget that. In the grand scheme of things, Jian 7 is actually a gun that could be considered a jack of all trades. It doesn't suck at anything, but it doesn't really excel at anything either. Not naturally, not alone. That is. So far, the best PvP perk set I've come across after testing out multiple different roles and talking it over with fellow Destiny creator Ironworker Gaming, who I would highly recommend you go sub to if you haven't already because he's a damn genius, has to be Zen Moment and Rangefinder, and my reasoning for that is with the right attachments to spec into any of the 3 stats I've gone over so far, this gun performs with all 3. This goes back into the whole jack of all trades thing that I was talking about earlier. It's not the absolute best at anything, but there isn't anything that it actually sucks at. Think of a 3-lane highway merging into a single road. That's basically how it is. Zen Moment allows for extra stability through sustained fire. Spec into that stat with the right attachments listed, and the gun goes from being a literal hit or miss into a surefire straight shot, especially when you factor any targeting mods into the equation, like a double stack of pulse rifle targeting on your helmet, and a target adjuster on the gun itself. Weapon stability is a crucial stat to have in a gunfight of any kind, especially if you can't track your targets well enough to compensate for the recoil from every round being fired. So the extra aim assist stacks on top of that extra stability from the gun perks, making you significantly more lethal across the board because in general, unless you're trying to combat a sniper rifle, the other player has a smaller chance of hitting you for critical damage at a longer range. Rangefinder factors into that as well, allowing you to deal extra damage from longer distances on top of the targeting mods, making it easier for you to hit those long-range shots. It all kind of rolls together. Handling is a bit different, but the general idea is exactly the same. If you have the perks to boost the stat to its maximum, you can increase it even more via mods. Firmly Planted gives you a stat bonus to target ac, handling, and stability when you're crouched down taking shots, which in turn makes your rounds more sticky, thus resulting in a gun with a great adds time, almost like the gun itself is weightless, with more rounds that are likely to actually hit. All of these perks can really give you an edge in a PvP environment, especially when you take into account the frame's low TTK. Handling directly affects weapon weight, if you will, mostly just ready and aim speed, so that might seem like a lousy stat to spec into, but if you can draw faster than the other guy, who's getting shot first? With maxed out handling, you can get that first shot off and outflinch your target, causing them to miss shots that would've or should've killed you. With maxed out stability, the rounds become more reliable, and recoil is easier to compensate for without causing you to miss shots. And last but not least, range is simply the best of the best. The easier it is to kill someone from further away, the better off you are. This is not the go-to PvP pulse rifle, but it is not a trash pulse rifle either. This gun is not without fault, though. Like I said earlier, its aim assist is much lower than I'd like, and oftentimes hitting those crits for the most optimal TTK is not the easiest thing in the world to do. You can't go wrong with a targeting adjuster. For PvP, a targeting adjuster will boost that 64 in target acquisition to a 69, which will make those rounds a bit more sticky and ultimately make it easier to hit those shots at a range. If you're still missing, I'd advise double stacking pulse rifle targeting on your helmet for an extra emphasis on not missing, because that will boost target acquisition even more. And if you're still missing after all of that, then you need to just download Aim Trainer and play something else for a little while. In closing, I 100% see this as a viable PvP option. It's not exactly my go-to weapon because I'm not the biggest fan of pulse rifles, but it is able to compete with other pulse rifles both in and outside of its archetype if you have the right drop, and it complements the way that you play against other players. It's not exactly something that I'm going to go out and farm for specifically, but if I happen to come across one, I'm going to hold on to it specifically for the Crucible. The role I'm using here wasn't exactly my preferred choice, which is part of the reason why this video took so long to complete, but it gave me the edge I needed to actually contribute to Crucible matches in more ways than just taking the objective. I started using pulse rifles a lot more often when they could pierce barriers back in the Season of Depression. I mean, the Season of Dawn, whatever, same thing. I was hard pressed to find a use for them in my usual loadouts because my arsenal mostly consists of hand cannons, shotguns, or SMGs, especially during the Season of Undying. But as the game changes, we all just kinda have to adjust with it. Unless you're the Recluse, then you're just phenomenal all year round. Until you sunset, of course. I miss my Recluse. Death Adder is just not the same. If you haven't managed to snag a Jian 7 yet, they are in the Whirlpool, and believe me when I say that once you get one, you'll start getting them left and right, because I ended up with like 30 of them, and I honestly never want to even see the word Jian ever again. It's like 3 a.m. right now. I am so tired. I'm gonna go cry myself to sleep.